The notion for the alchemists that Jung brought forth very strongly was the idea of projection of psychic contents, projection of the active imagination onto processes and objects in the exterior world. The mushrooms, the psilocybin affects the imagination. It is a stimulant to the imagination, and I don't really think that that is dissipated, or if it is dissipated, it's very slowly. Also, I'm not entirely convinced of the claim of the yogic schools that they can lock in these extraordinary states permanently. It seems to me that the shamans that I have had acquaintance with certainly are not abusers of these substances. On the other hand, they are regular users. And I think that it's fine that the insights are tested against the momentum of down reality. Yoga, most schools of yoga, in fact, I believe all schools of yoga, can be traced back to the 2nd century, the yogic sutras of Patanjali. Well, Patanjali explicitly states that light-filled herbs, his phrase, light-filled herbs, are one of the legitimate paths to achieving these high states. Certainly, if you look at the Rig Vedas are a vast and enthusiastic paean of praise to something called Soma, which was greater than Indra, greater than the gods of the old Vedic pantheon, the central mystery of the Vedic civilization. Gordon Wasson has argued very persuasively that it was a mushroom of some sort. So I really believe that if we had a completely clear picture of the evolution of Indian culture, we would see that for some reason, open at this point in history and looking back at it only to speculation, an institution of botanical shamanism was transformed into the notion of a lineage and a secret teaching and a set of physiological practices. So the issue of permanence is a kind of an odd one. Obviously, once you are not always stoned if you take a hallucinogen, a plant hallucinogen, but I am living proof that you're never the same. So somewhere between always stoned and never be the same is where one falls. And this is why I often talk about what I call living in the imagination. The imagination, which begins as a slight, almost a flicker of iridescence across the mental world of ordinary reality, is going to grow and self-reinforce and expand until it will be virtually all there is, if that's all one chooses to experience. Now, a person living in, let's say, Midtown Manhattan, they live in a dimension where nature has been entirely read out. The problem is it has been literally read out. It has been bulldozed into non-existence. What we need to create is the equivalent of Midtown Manhattan, but in a dimension such that it nowhere comes tangential to the body of the planet, either by scenario 1, the engineering scenario, by placing it in outer space, or scenario 2, the postmodern engineering scenario, putting it into nanotechnology, or scenario 3, the psychedelic engineering scenario, where we somehow put it into mind, whatever that is. So the post-historical world is the world where thought defines the modalities of being rather than the laws of physics and inertia. If wishes were horses, beggars would ride. Well, eventually, I think wishes will be horses and beggars will ride, but not across the surface of this planet, but through and across the endless grasslands of the imagination. And when it finally comes into view, it actually goes, without ever passing over a noticeable moment of transition, from being heard to being seen through the phenomenon of approach. You hear it before you see it, then you see it far away, then you see it very close, and when you see it very close, who cares what it sounds like, because you're seeing it. This more perfect logos is what the tykes, the spiritual helpers, want to teach. And I think that it's important to spend a little time on this, because I think this would have tremendous historical impact upon our situation if we could, by hook or by crook, create a more visible logos, a language which could be seen. You've probably all considered at some time or another, what would telepathy be like? And I think most people answer that question by thinking that telepathy would be for me to hear what you think. But how would it be if telepathy were for me to see what you mean? That's telepathy. If it puts you in the other guy's shoes, if you stand in the other person's shoes, you are the other person. To have a person's point of view is to be that person in regard to that single datum of experience. So I've spent time with virtual reality people and all these technical folks, because I think that visual language is something that wants to be born. And it may be that can be technologically coaxed into existence, that we're going to have to wear goggles and have fast computer, or it may be that it can be physiologically coaxed into existence. There may be drugs which shift the processing of language from being an auditory phenomenon to being a visible phenomenon. Ayahuasca is an excellent candidate for this. If you spend time with the ayahuasca-taking populations in the Amazon, there's great stress in these populations on acquiring what's called an icaro. Icaro means magical song, and the icaro is a spontaneous chant-like song which comes to you during the intoxication. The thing that's interesting about these icaros is that they are critiqued as visual objects, not as sound. People never say of an icaro, it sounded beautiful. They always say, it looked lovely. And then people will say, but there should have been more blue. This kind of thing, it's clearly being criticized as a visual modality. Well, I think that these ayahuasca-using people are at the cutting edge of evolution. They are forcing the evolution of the modality of language. It may be that the processing of language is not hardwired, not physiologically wired. It's a software function having to do with culture, language, upbringing, and so forth, because some people claim they are great visualizers and that they do think visually and so forth. And we have no reason to deny this. So it may be that we are just a one gene or even an expression of gene ratios difference away from an entirely different way of processing communication between each other. And this is what the New Age, the end of history, the anticipation of this great breakthrough that we can feel but not really outline is about. If that seems far-fetched to you, you should notice how far-fetched the original emergence of language must have been. Because I think people were fully people and totally mute, or, unable to articulate a thought. And then either an accumulation of neurons or some synergistic effect was brought into play, and lo and behold, spoken language emerged out of that. Well, something similar could happen to us. In the morning session, I talked about the forced evolution of language, paying attention to our language. I really think that the way to think of these psychedelics is as catalysts for the imagination. If any of you are chemists, you know a catalyst is something that when you add it to a chemical process, the process is tremendously speeded up. But in the end, the catalyst is not destroyed. The catalyst is reconstituted at the end. So psychedelics, one way of thinking of them is as a catalyst for cognition. The original description of psychedelic drugs was they were consciousness expanding drugs. Well, if we take the idea that they are consciousness expanding seriously for even a moment, then we have to put a lot of attention in on this, because it's the absence of consciousness that is murdering us and our planet. We need all the consciousness we can get.